Hey everybody. So I'm back for the last episode, The Secrets of Hillsong. First of all, I just want to thank everybody who has subscribed to the channel, who's been supporting it. And my channel is still growing, and so I just want to make sure I say thank you to you all. Today is exam day, that's why, but I don't have to proctor today. Ooh, and I got through my research papers. Well, the ones they turned in, there's two missing. Don't get me started. All right. So this is the final review of FX Secrets of Hillsong's False Prophets Season 1, Episode 4. Honestly, this whole thing could have been called False Prophets. Forget Secrets of Hillsong. Anyway, the whole title should have been that. So we get off with Brian Houston, okay? The non-charismatic person who has managed to run this corporation using God as a marketing tool. So, Brian Houston has apparently continued misinterpreting the Bible and says that the more bad things happen, the closer we are to deliverance. So, he takes these biblical ideas of wars, rumors of wars, famine, so on and so forth that Jesus talks about in the Bible. And see, we're closer to deliverance, right? And this is how people play with the Word of God. Because truth be told, that can apply to plenty of periods after death. Okay, like before Christ, after death. Yeah, that can apply to plenty of periods in history. Hell, especially for African Americans, it doesn't seem like the last and evil days for the past 5 centuries. You know what I mean? So, like, cut it. Okay, cut it. All right, but instead, this has become attractive, and these are the people talking about it, attractive to his followers, especially with scandal, because it makes it seem like Brian Houston is being persecuted, right? And people are following him because it seems like this is only happening to him because Jesus is coming back. And see, this is the thing. Um, Brian Houston has essentially substituted Jesus for himself. Do you see what I mean? So it's always about him suffering. And then Jesus just is kind of this game that this ploy to get people to follow him. And you remember, well, people who grew up in real church, and we used to sing, "Don't let him catch you with your work undone." Well, look, he's gonna catch all y'all at Hillsong with your work undone, and it's not gonna be good. So essentially, the more scandal associated with him, and that rolls out, he's already groomed his membership, global membership in many ways, um, to believe that this is ultimately for good, and so on and so forth. And he's groomed them to see him as a victim, which will keep his membership and money rolling in. That's the game. All right, now pause. And I only saw this because I was scrolling on TikTok. I don't know how it ended up in my TikTok, but it was just like, why do I keep saying this? But did y'all see TD Jakes? That's another mega church one. Okay. Okay. His daughter, apparently Sarah Jakes, whatever her name is, lose her wig. I said, girl, bye. All right. And to me, that was another form of manipulation because I made the mistake of reading some of the comments on those videos, and people were like, see, that she's focused on the word of God. I was like, I wouldn't be surprised if that was an entire setup to go viral and get more people tuning in and giving money to their corporation. Okay, that another one that uses God as a marketing tool. And if your hair and outfits don't matter because you're focused on the word of God, darling, then why are you trying to stunt in the first place? If none of that mattered in the first place, why'd you spend so much time on it? Well, clearly you didn't because it wasn't secure. But anyway, she's another performer. And you can tell she's a performer because it's the show must go on. When Beyonce's hair got stuck in that fan, what you do? The show must go on. Oh, girl kept singing. The difference is Beyonce is clear she's a performer. You trying to convince us that you were called by God to mislead people. Girl, bye. To keep the family hustle going is clearly the plan. Yeah, that's just a side note. Anyway, so Brian Houston's scandal and beliefs are all about him. They're all about him. They're not about the will of God. God is just the smokescreen. And let me tell you, you're going to hell for that. Okay? And all y'all following him going right in that ditch. Anyway, so we get a video of Brian Houston giving a video announcement to his church and saying he wanted the people of Hillsong to hear directly from him about how he's stepping aside because the church's legal counsel has advised him to do that. But he's telling them this, that he wants to hear it directly from him in a pre-recorded video. Now, if you wanted them to hear directly from you, you would have stood up in front of that congregation in Australia and fucking told them. You're a chump like your father when he went on vacation for 2 weeks when people were coming out about him being a pedophile. Anyway, they fast forward to March 2022. So somebody gave an anonymous tip to a journalist, which is a big deal, as they pointed out to us before, because journalists have not been able to really penetrate Hillsong. Now, if this was a regular church, I'd have a problem with people doing all this digging and trying to make one person look bad. But this isn't a church. This is a corporation that uses God as a marketing tool. Shout out to that white man whose name I do not remember in that Discovery Plus documentary. Because when he articulated it that way, that was the best verbal articulation of a lot of these mega churches that I've seen. Well, that I've heard. Anyway, so when people start coming out, a journalist getting an anonymous tip means somebody's ready to talk. So Carl Lentz said, so they bring us back to Carl Lentz. Okay. Said it's hard to find people who talk about Hillsong. He was like, because we sign such ironclad NDAs. And the need for those NDAs says to me a lot of shit goes down. Okay, just saying. So apparently it's so ironclad that when Carl Lentz brought it up, literally the producer interrupted him and said, quote, I just want to go on record and say that you don't need to talk about this at all, end quote. And Carl Lentz clearly heard her, but kept talking. He said, I just think he was like, fuck it at this point. I mean, who they gonna sue? All the scandal they got, it ain't worth it. It's gonna draw more attention because he was so big and a part of their corporation at the time. So they asked a person being interviewed, why does Hillsong need NDAs? Why does the church need NDAs? And the man they were interviewing, he was like, because Hillsong and mega churches are corporations. He was like, they take in millions of dollars. They manage thousands of square feet in property. They want to protect themselves. So the model that they adopt is the corporate model. They have HR, they have NDAs, so on and so forth. And that's standard for corporations. You know, when we're dealing with insider, trading secrets, Wall Street, those kind of things that they want to protect within the corporation. But it's not standard for churches. And see, that's the thing. That in and of itself is a problem to me. You're modeling yourself off a corporate structure. Hillsong and most of these mega churches, I'm not saying all, because they are corporations that use God as a marketing tool, their whole goal is to make money. And once something is not making that money and that profit, they'll pivot to something else that brings in money. And this is what I don't like. Find something else to hustle on. Capitalism is old. Only a few people can benefit. And the few people tend to be the people in the upper crust of these organizations. And people fall for it over and over again. But then they give small churches a hard time. This is what I mean. Like, this is the bullshit for me. Anyway, so the people they start to interview are college students. And I was like, oh, were they recruiting college students like in New York to work at some point? No, I thought they were real college students. These were Hillsong college students, okay? And like I said before, that degree has the same power as one from ICDC. What? I don't give a fuck who put their stamp on it in Australia. You can't use that degree like nowhere else to apply for a job. It's not like a regular master of divinity and that kind of thing. Anyway, so they asked them, they said they were interviewing them and they were saying, the Hillsong college students were saying they had been interviewed as part of the process, and they would ask them questions like, have you had sex in the last year? When was the last time you masturbated? Have you had hallucinations of demons? Like crazy shit, right? But I imagine if you believed in these sort of things, like as one person said, well, I thought, well, what could come bad of telling the truth? Let me just be honest, right? Mistake, but she didn't know that at the time. So essentially they are claiming to be gathering this information to make sure you can work with children. Considering the history of Frank Houston, they had their nerve. Especially since they didn't hold him accountable. But okay. But it's really a ploy to find out information that they can use against you later. That's essentially what it is. All right, things that are with you and wrong with you, whatever. It reminded me though of when I first got to New York. And I decided I wanted to be a mentor in the Big Brother, Big Sister program. And I got through and I worked with this little girl for a year and it was fun. But there was still... Me and the little girl had a great relationship, but you go for a year and then you can decide after that. And I decided I wanted to end it after a year. Not because of the little girl, not because of her mother, not because of any of that. Just because there were things with that program that was given real white savior, and I just did not want to be a part of that as a Black person. Real white Latinos who, would do very condescending things to Black people. And I didn't like that. But I remember they asked me when they were interviewing me questions like, when did you lose your virginity? Was it a good experience or a bad experience? And I was probably like, what, 27, 28? And I was like, this shit is weird. And like, I know I lied on purpose because it was nobody's business. But in retrospect, I finished the 1 year of the mentorship I signed up for because of the kid I was working with for the sake of the kid. But that shit is wrong and I'll never do it again. So I can see how somebody can intend to do something good and fuck up. At that point, I should have just said, you know what? I don't understand the purpose of these questions. And I may have made some comment like that. Well, this is just what we do. We need to go through. And I shouldn't have, I should have actually just got up then. So I can see somebody meaning well and fucking up. And this is one of those cases. Of course, I wasn't at a church, but nevertheless. So for Hillsong, when people were asked these questions, they would get their badge after going through the process to work with the kids. But if you had a red dot on your badge, everybody knows the guy was saying you're struggling with something, whether it's homosexuality, porn, and they always said you're struggling with it. So it wasn't like, oh, we accept everybody. Now they accept everybody's money. Okay, but they don't accept that lifestyle. So one guy said a guy came up to him about something he didn't talk to him about. And said, you had a homosexual experience. And he was like, the fuck you know that? Who are you? You know, one of those. And he said, I didn't. I didn't have a homosexual experience. That never happened. And he then goes on to say, in his interview, I was molested as a kid, and that's not the same thing. And I was like, no, it's not. It's not. And it's also not appropriate. These conversations were happening with other people, and now it's being weaponized against you. And I was thinking, fucking shame on all of you all for re traumatizing that man. All right. So he said it was clear after that interaction that he would never go any further in the church. And I was like, that's a blessing. You don't even realize it. Just leave and go on about your business. They showed him at the end. He said he's a happy atheist, this, that, and the other. Do your thing, but Hillsong is not a church and also not a reflection of Jesus Christ. Okay. So survivors of Hillsong started commenting, using social media, commenting on Hillsong stuff on the church after they left or they found things wrong with it. And they blocked them. Hillsong blocked all these people, which in regular cults would be known as quote unquote defectors. Okay. So they started their own group for survivors of Hillsong. And they were like, within a week, we had like 300 or 400 members. They started to tell their stories and find camaraderie with each other on social media. So now this is also to some degree global now, right? About their bad experiences. And there's this girl named Anna Crenshaw, and I'm saying her name because she came out. Anna Crenshaw complained about a man groping her inappropriately at Hillsong who was a pastor. She said she went to the police and pressed charges against this man named Jason Mays. He, I think, either pleaded guilty or took a plea bargain, something of that nature, whatever the case was. He was given 2 years probation and mandatory counseling. That was the judgment. At Hillsong, after Anna Crenshaw came out, because she had actually reported it just to HR, because she didn't want it to happen again. And some people can say, oh, we all had a party drinking, and so he groped you. It was a mistake. Yeah, there are mistakes that happen. But that kind of groping, do you really think that people feel empowered to push back against pastors like that? And he's groping, he's grabbing her private parts. And I think women are trained to believe it's not a big deal or it's not serious enough. And that's the problem. And I guarantee you, if it happened to her, he had done that before. He had done that before to other women. Okay? As we find everything, coming out. I mean, not necessarily about him, but just in general at Hillsong. So at Hillsong, guess what? Guess what happened to this guy? Well, they gave him a higher position, making more money, and Hillsong protected him. Because his father was the man over human resources. If that's not a conflict of interest, I don't know what is. So the young lady was like, they kept framing it as if something happened to Jason, not her. And even when Brian Houston was talking about it, he was like, he's a young married guy. He did something stupid. He was drinking. But, he makes mistakes. It's something we had to continue to address, this, that, and the other. And she was like, they just kept framing it like he was the victim. And she was like, so that's when I went to the press and started talking. And honestly, a lot of this shit could have been avoided had y'all just addressed it in house, but y'all didn't. Y'all didn't. And y'all can't tell that woman how to tell her story. Anyway, so we get Brian Houston's fuck shit again. This is a mess. All right, so he was accused by a secretary or employee of the church. I can't remember exactly. By flirting inappropriately through some text messages, whatever. She quit. She was blackballed and unable to get another job. And in a place like Australia, where they talk about how Hillsong has a whole lot of power, um, as a church over people, their connections with politicians, their connection with, the police force, that's very possible. You know what I mean? That's very possible. To blackball somebody and keep them unable to get a job. Don't act like it doesn't happen. And if it's one of those things that you feel like has to happen to you for you to believe it, that's unfortunate. Anyway, so more women come out with almost the same story of Houston going into their hotel rooms, making them uncomfortable. And he made the problem with all of this, one, is his inappropriate behavior as this kind of stringent, married to your wife should please you sexually, this, that, and the other, what people shouldn't be doing morally, this Pentecostal, very strict approach, but you're behaving like this. And the hypocrisy of the hypocrisy of the hypocrisy was that he had made Hillsong New York, when Carl Lentz was over, as appear as an individual problem, right? But he was paying hush money to different women about things he had done. And so that's the thing. Like, Carl Lentz, I think, was intended to be used as a scapegoat. Now, do I believe Carl Lentz, as I've said before, is a charlatan and a shyster and was all part of the manipulation and getting rich and all this other shit? Yes. Yes, he was. He was. He was profiting from celebrities and being around them and bringing their money into the church and baptizing people in the bathtub at 2 o'clock in the morning. Like, just, huh? Okay. So I'm not saying that, but I am saying that he became convenient for them to push everything on. And I do think it was part of personal jealousy. There can be hypocrisies within hypocrisies. All right. So after 45 years, Brian resigned. He didn't do it directly. Whatever the fuck that means. See, whenever things are unclear, they're unclear on purpose to keep something going. All right. So he had a few social media apologies, went on vacation, and had another person read the news to the congregation. He literally did exactly what his father did when he got in trouble. He ran. All right. So Hillsong started to fall apart, especially in the United States. People started to jump ship. Okay, even ministers in places like Boston and Atlanta, where they had been kind of set up to succeed and be rich, they took their money and jumped ship because none of these people were dedicated to the gospel. They're worried about their PR. Period. That's what they're worried about. All right. And these are people who would have still probably continued to benefit monetarily for some time. But I think they started to see the writing on the wall, hell, and probably were part of all the bullshit anyway. So Phil Dooley is the guy that becomes the interim pastor, global pastor of Hillsong. And they were like, he's a guy with a beanie and curly hair. He doesn't really have what Brian Houston had. And I was like, what? Nothing? He looks like a ragamuffin that would have been an extra on Pee Wee Herman. And Brian Houston looks like a weirdo that tried out for Mr. Rogers' position and never got it. Like, what the fuck? These people, huh? I wouldn't take advice from any of these people. Anyway, so the reporting process became easier, though, they said, once Brian Houston left. And allegations became more public because more whistleblowers felt like they could come out and felt safer to do it because he's not in that position of manipulative authority. After 45 years he's been in charge, yeah. I bet they were trying to get it out while they could. So March 2023, we fast forward. So I'm like, this just happened yesterday. His court case isn't going to even have a sentencing until June. In a couple of weeks. And I'm just like, oh wow, this shit is recent. All right, so it became apparent that nothing was going to happen, even with all the allegations. People were talking. They bring that senator back from Parliament, and they said it became apparent that nothing was happening to Hillsong or Brian Houston legally, despite all the evidence. They had used the quote unquote poor box, which was, I guess, what they sent around, which is much more nicely termed missions and mercy offerings. But they called it the poor box. And so people would give money to it, thinking they were giving food to the poor, whatever. And they pulled it up in Parliament. And they're like, no, they spent this stuff on personal luxuries. They had bank receipts. They were like, this will put a Kardashian to shame. I said, oh, in Australia? That's the comparison they use. Oh, this is bad. The Houston family. So all that money went to the Houston family. We're not even talking about like employees. The Houston family. Okay, not the poor, what many thought they were given to, and also to hush money for other people. All right. So the more journalists learned about Brian's indiscretions, if you want to call them that, they felt as if it made his handling of Carl Lentz make less sense. And to me, I was like, no, it makes sense. It's just completely hypocritical. He pointed the finger at him to keep all the attention, Carl Lentz, keep the attention off of him. They two sides of the same coin. So Carl Lentz, they show him and his new life. He has moved into advertising. Shocking. He was in a corporate model. He was like, I've been advertising for Jesus Christ. No, you weren't. No, you weren't. And you need to keep that. You need to just sit your blasphemous ass down. Anyway, he said, well, he moved to Florida because it's off the radar. I said, Florida? Off the radar for what? We can't get rid of Florida in the news. What are you talking about? Okay, just say the people are dumb, they're racist, they're conservative, and would gladly forgive a white charlatan like you, okay, because they are into maintaining white supremacy and will give you a job with few questions. You live in a state with almost no taxes. And honestly, he went to rehab. These people are still living good. They're still living good. I'll get to that in a second. So I want him to stop generalizing Christianity and how it has rejected science and therapy. And yes, to some degree that's true for many people, but that's true for Muslims, that's true for Jewish people, that's true for a lot of people who are religious at all, right? To believe in their God and not the things of what they consider man. That's not unique, all right? Carl Lentz, you're still a scammer. I'm not going for it, okay? Because we have yet to see you broke. That's how I know you was making money over money over money. So Brian comes back to Australia. Now we back to Brian Houston. Just scammer after scammer. Exhausting. Okay, so Brian comes back to Australia to rebuild his brand. So he says that the media said that he resigned. So he's talking to the people. The media said I resigned because of this misconduct. But it was really, I resigned because of the lies about my misconduct. Sir, if you couldn't get nobody to read over that. All these years you've been lying, you didn't find something better to say than that. Eek. All right. Anyway, so Brian started to go against Hillsong via media. Even after all those years, this is his corporation that he's built, but he's been kicked out. Hillsong terminated Bobby. He was like, he was shocked. Why? Her money is your money. Your money is her money. That's y'all's money. And they wanted to stop flowing to y'all. Okay? They did the same thing to Laura Lentz and others. It's a corporation. A corporation, when its employees, leaders, whoever, are no longer serving the purpose of the corporation, which is making as much money as possible, funneling money into the organization, you are no longer of use. In fact, you are dispensable. Anybody can go. You set it up that way. You should know that better than anybody else. Anyway, so then we get Brian on trial. His entourage has decreased significantly, down to his wife and one of his daughters, no bodyguards like he had before. So it's clear his money is drying up, and certainly people's associations with him have ended. All very cult-like, right? You know, people fall off as regular friends and stuff like that when people get in trouble. But still, it's kind of like, anyway. So one of Frank Houston's victims, Frank Houston, his father, so we're not talking about Brian. Frank Houston's victims came out and came to court, okay, to testify. Apparently Frank Houston's wife, which is Brian Houston's mother, Hazel Houston, knew about the sexual abuse of her by her husband. And I was like, that doesn't surprise me. Even if she didn't know all the intimate details, of course she knew. Of course she knew. She helped cover it up, I'm sure. Honestly, I wouldn't be surprised if she was an abused woman. Okay, so now that we know that, seeing how little y'all have done for the sexual abuse victims still speaking out, now that we know she knew, and I'm assuming she is in the grave. Forgive me if she's not, but they don't bring her up except for this. They interview Brian Houston about it, and he says, I don't feel responsible personally for it. He said, and I don't feel like Hillsong is responsible. He said, but morally, that's a different issue. I was like, okay, way to shake it off. All right, so then we get Laura Lentz and her mother. Laura Lentz's mother says, Laura Lentz says she's mad at God because she sacrificed so much for the church. She was mad at Carl for putting them in this position. Her mom was like, look, she lost a lot of friends, she lost position. I was like, first of all, I don't know what God you mad at, but it ain't the one I serve. Okay. And I'm not saying people can't go through things where they aren't angry with God, but what you're angry at is Hillsong because y'all are not associated with the kingdom, honey. No, that nothing y'all are doing is for the glory of God. Anyway, bitch, did y'all see that house they're living in despite all this? White people's idea of loss is some bullshit. Okay, because meanwhile, black people have to work to get their kind of downgrade. That's their idea of a downgrade. That's their idea of we lost so much. I said, huh? Get the fuck up out of here. And your parents can come and just stay with you and live. I don't know if they live there, but they look mighty cozy. That's all I have to say. Anyway, so she said, people ask, why did I stay? She said, I stay because Carl is trying and changing. And if he doesn't, I'll leave. She said, that's the same thing I told my kids. And I just feel like the fact that their kids know it. And granted, when you're a public figure, some of these things happen. I don't think they should have had those kids on camera at all. And they're not, at least two of them look like they're under 18. But I think the fact that the kids know it, they had them on camera in this series was still irresponsible. Especially if one of your kids, your oldest child, tried to commit suicide about this and they're still young. I don't think that's a good idea. Then we get what we always get when there are white people who fall and do terrible things. The happily ever after, and you let this have been a black family. They would have ended with that doomsday music and shit, but okay. We're gonna let Carl Lentz live happily ever after, even though he's a charlatan too. And talked about how he had helped cover up shit, admitted it in his documentary. Anyway, so then you have all the people who left Hillsong. They give us kind of a follow up with many of them. The old black woman says she wants Hillsong to go down because it's the last church she'll ever go to on this side of heaven. It wasn't a real church. Like I told you on the first episode, I think it was a hustle. I think they saw her in there. I think white people have this idea of the old black person being loyal to them, and they decided they would use it. And she didn't like things that were going on. And what we're not going to do is punish the body of Christ for y'all's misunderstandings. But okay. Many of the people they interviewed said they stopped believing in Christianity and going to church. I can understand how people come to this conclusion, especially if this was your only entry into Christianity. But this was never a church. And it was never Christianity. Okay? You got had. You got took. Okay? Carl and Laura were never called by God. They are false prophets. They're looking for another hustle. Hence this FX series so they can probably re-enter their way into a reality show. I wouldn't be surprised. And I don't feel sorry for them. And that's all I have to say about FX's Secrets of Hillsong series. Thank you guys. See you soon. Bye.